Hello everyone, welcome to Megafoon Sport. It's my privilege to have Brenden Nel here. We're going to have a chat about Jake White's idea of bringing back 150 of the top overseas players, South African players playing overseas. And Brenden, you and I had a talk on the way back from Loftus the other day. Do you think, let's start right from the beginning, do you think it's sustainable at all or viable? Will it ever work?
It's lovely in theory, like most things in theory. The problem we have in South African rugby is, first of all, you've got to look at the environment you're living in. We're living in a country with a very volatile currency, a very weak currency in comparison to French euros and pounds and things like that. So it's all wonderful saying, and we'd love to have all our players back here. And if you see just the amount of players, just for instance, the Bulls have lost in the last couple of years. There's certainly that sort of nostalgia for that. But rugby's changed, the game's changed. We're part of a professional game at the moment. We're part of Europe in our club competitions, and that might lure a number of players back to South Africa. Just we want more the sunshine and the weather and the close to families. That's the thing you hear most from them, is the weather and the families, being close to grandma and grandpa and things like that. But at the end of the day, if you're a young player and you're promising, and somebody comes and offers you 3 times your salary that you're earning in South Africa, and you can see those who say no to that sort of offer, and it's tough. And I understand from Jake, and I understand the point of view of Rassie as well from an SA rugby point of view. I don't think it's sustainable. I think in a perfect world it would be. But you got to ask yourself, Jake is in a situation at the moment where he's got equity partners with deep pockets, but those things can also change. All you need is a currency fluctuation or the rand to dive like we've had in the last couple of years, and then those things become even harder to manage. So we've got a lot of talent in this country. We shouldn't be a feeder system to European clubs, but unfortunately money talks. So that's the bottom line.
Yeah, never mind if you have the money to be able to lure them back. You have a budget cap. You're only allowed to spend so much money on players anyway, regardless. I mean, no matter how deep your pockets are, you might not necessarily be allowed to bring them back in terms of money, or you have to bring 1 or 2 marquee players back at the expense of 10 others or younger guys that might be doing greater things in the future. Yeah,
no, I think, it's a double-edged sword, because the players who play in Europe obviously open up places for younger players here to play in the franchises. Now, ideally, what you'd want is that system to be that there's enough opportunities, and there's the mixture of like all coaches want, of youth and experience, that you have that perfect blend to be there. But that's not always what it's going to be, and there's no coach I've ever met that has the perfect squad. Most of them have to sort of patch together, and as I said in Afrikaans, spoeg en plak till you get it right. And sometimes it works, and sometimes you're lucky, and sometimes the bounce of a ball can just kill your whole season. So yes, in ideal world, I agree with Jake. I see his point, but I see SA Rugby's point. Rossi's got a different view. He says that the fact that 4 of the 10 scrum halves in England in the Premiership there are non-English limits their sort of ability to develop their own, and gives our players a top professional environment. It's changed now. That was the time when Ivan van Zyl and Faf de Klerk and those guys, Kobus Reinach, were around there. That's changed a bit now, but the idea is right. If you can get your top guys playing in top leagues and top competitions, and you're still developing players at the same time, that's not a bad place to be. Of course, that comes at the expense of the local franchises, because that's putting Springbok rugby first, and the local franchises lose those players. You just have to look at the team, the guys that the Bulls have lost, who've played for the Boks. Just look at Locke. I mean, if you just take Lou de Jager, RK Snyman, Jason Jenkins, Paul Willems, who plays for France, Eli Snyman, who's playing for Benetton at the moment. Geez, there's a couple more that I could probably find if I had to go. But just those guys, you put them back in a team at the Bulls, or just 3 or 4 of them, and you've got a different pack that you're dealing with there as well. So you're either going to go the route that the Sharks do and spend a lot of money, and that comes with its disadvantages, being that when the Boks play Rugby Championship, you don't have those players for half the season. You're paying a lot of money for players you can't use, or you do like Jake has been doing lately, is try and get guys back like the Nazan Cars, the Marcel Couture's, guys who aren't in the international frame anymore, but still have that experience and etc. So yeah, it's ideally we'd want all our players to play in South Africa, but this is you can't stop players from moving, you can't stop players from accepting big money offers, and that's the bottom line.
Well, the thing is, if those players are overseas, it allows younger players on this side of the pond to be developed. I mean, you got look at like you just said the Bulls team, and Jake said on Tuesday, look at my team, look how young they are, and there's some quite exciting players. I mean, he made one of them a very good offer, a long-term offer, and he declined. I'm not going to name him, but the point is, like you just said, that's not going to work in the long term. And like you said, buying these expensive Springboks, yeah, even when they can play, it doesn't necessarily translate into results on the field. Look at the Sharks. I mean, it's not working at all. It's only now, towards the end of the season, that they're starting to click a little bit, and it looks like they might be up for a challenge in the EPCR Challenge Cup, but it doesn't work. The question I want to ask you, let's have a look quickly at what the other countries are doing. And they've got a slightly different approach. Rassie is not worried about protecting the local guys. All the other countries are mostly trying to focus on getting the players to play in that country. We specifically talked about Ireland here. Ireland does not allow anybody to play for Ireland if they don't play for one of the 4 Irish teams. Am I correct?
Yeah, but the thing with Ireland is that they've got an incredible academy system. It's a very small country. They've got a very small bunch of players, and they do exceptionally well to develop them. But then again, I mean, you look at that, you just have to chat to somebody like Johan van Graan, who was Munster's coach, or you chat to any of the coaches of the other 3 provinces outside Leinster, and they'll tell you that all the top schools are in Dublin, so all those players get snapped up by Leinster, and Munster, Connacht, and Ulster sort of scramble for what's left. So it's all very well for Irish rugby to have a strong Leinster, but the other provinces don't get the same amount of access to players. So that also becomes a bit of a lopsided system, like we see in Ireland, where Leinster dominate everything, and you have the outliers where Munster do what URC, but yeah, those are exceptions rather than the norm, because Leinster have got the top 30 odd players in Ireland, and then the other guys who come through, and there'll always be somebody that surprises you, and always somebody who takes the opportunity in another place. That's how sport works. But just the majority of that I'm not sure that's people in Dublin will tell you it's a great system, and Irish rugby will tell you it's a great system, but you venture outside Dublin and the views are a bit different there.
And the other countries, England's got the same problem. If you don't play in the Premiership in England, you're not allowed to play for England. You have to play in one of those 10 teams that are left after 3 of them went down last year. And that's now becoming a problem. Like you just said, a couple of years ago, 4 of the 10 scrum halves were non-English players. And a lot of those English players are now going overseas to go play in France and the likes, because there are simply not enough spaces left, firstly. And secondly, the budget cap is becoming a problem. But what do you think England's going to do because yesterday they confirmed they're not changing that system. Do you think that that's sustainable?
No, I think we've seen on South African points where you try and do that and you lose games, and the pressure comes on very quickly onto you. So I don't see them winning that long term. I think the problem is you've got two super leagues in the world, France and Japan, and unfortunately France seems to have unending money, and we talk about player budgets and salary caps and things like that. It doesn't seem like the French ever have one, even though they apparently do. But they seem to buy players left, right, and centre. And I don't quite understand. I think it's a different argument when your players are South African and New Zealand and they're playing in Europe, as when you're playing somewhere that you get within 45 minutes on a plane. I think that's a very different argument. And I don't quite see. I know they want to protect the Premiership, but I can see them losing that battle eventually.
Like you just said, the only country that doesn't have a problem with their players basically going overseas is France, because like you just said, the top 14 is so lucrative. They don't have any desire to go play anywhere else in the world, so they don't have a problem.
Yeah.
Wales have got a bit of a hybrid system, very similar to what Australia does. You have to have played 60 tests, if I'm not mistaken, if you want to go play overseas to be selected for Wales. But Wales have got bigger problems than just their players. That whole Wales rugby system is sort of imploding at the moment, I think.
Yeah, look, their franchises are under a lot of financial pressure. It's a small country. Anybody who's been to Wales will know it feels like Bloemfontein's a younger, smaller sister type thing. It's really a mining sort of, well, maybe not so much mining anymore, but very much a very rural type area, even though they've got a big city like Cardiff. But in terms of rugby, there's not the resources there. There's not the crowds. I mean, they fill up stadiums of 10, 12,000, but yeah, as much as we love Welsh rugby, and they really contribute well to the world rugby landscape, they don't have the depth, and they don't have the same sort of feeder system that South Africa has, and plus they've been trying to compete with the bigger leagues in keeping players, and that's also when they went down to 4 regions, it also brought other financial problems for them as well. So they've got financial issues. I mean, I must admit, I'm not totally au fait with everything that they're going through, but all you read about is financial pressures and Welsh rugby, and if you can't pay somebody, they're going to go find somewhere else to play, and that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about Wales, we mentioned this briefly the other day at Loftus again, but maybe we should lose 1 or 2 of the Welsh teams, and then maybe bring in another extra South African team, which the Irish won't allow. But don't you think the Wales would be better off going to play in England, maybe as part of the Premiership? Solves the problem of there only being 10 teams left. Maybe they can expand it to 14 with the Welsh teams. So would the English rugby people go for that, or is that not sustainable either?
I don't think it's sustainable as well. I mean, I know there's a lot of talk in English circles about that, but nowadays also rugby is very much governed by equity partners, and that's why we're seeing talk of a World Club Cup and things like that, because the equity partners want a return on revenue, and while that might be exciting in the first season or two, I don't see those sort of rivalries developing that are sustainable, and that in fact I see after probably a year or two English sides dominating that league, and then it becomes like Super Rugby when New Zealand sides dominate it, and so what's really left? So to have a healthy competition, you have to have rivalries, you have to have games that you can't predict, you have to have upsets. I'm not quite sure that will happen maybe in the first year, but with the strength of the Welsh clubs at the moment, I don't see that happening with English teams. And plus, I think the English teams have got more financial muscle at the end of the day, even though they're struggling financially. I think they'll probably be able to lure the better players to them, to the bigger markets, whereas Wales will always struggle with that.
Glad you mentioned Super Rugby, because what a disaster that has turned out to be ever since we packed our bags and left for Europe. And New Zealand's now struggling to keep hold of their players. I mean, the guys are going overseas, they're going to play in Japan and everything else, and they've got a very strict rule. If you don't play in New Zealand, you don't play for the All Blacks. End of discussion. And there seems to be a lot of voices going up there that they must be changing their system, maybe towards maybe a lower threshold or something like that. What do we know about that side of it?
Well, look, I mean, New Zealand's always been unique. They've always had a similar type feeder system to South Africa in terms of they've always had loads of players coming through, and they've also had the islands that they've also, I won't say, I mean, it's an old argument that they've gone and stolen everything from Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga, but a lot of those, that's almost changed because just economically, the way New Zealand has been stronger in the area, a lot of those families with young kids, etc., have moved to New Zealand, so they've had the benefit of that as well. And a lot of the Samoan and Tongan and Fijian players that play in Super Rugby have been born in New Zealand nowadays. So I mean that system's almost done about turn. The problem New Zealand has is when South Africa left, and unfortunately they basically kicked us out. They said they didn't want us anymore. They opened that door, which was a wonderful decision by their CEO, which I think New Zealand Rugby will never forgive him for. But I don't think they realized. You always hear these sort of yelps and people talking about we don't need them. But South Africa, first of all, provided 3 times the revenue and audiences, TV audiences, to Super Rugby that the other 2 nations did. Second of all, it gave it also European time zones, so you picked up viewers in Europe that would watch games in their time zones, which you don't now in Super Rugby. Everything's in the middle of the night or in the morning, which doesn't make it lucrative for European TV companies to pick it up. They do, but they don't pay as much anymore, just because it's just not in their main prime time zones. So they lost that, and then they lost the physicality of playing against South African teams. And you know what? I mean, there's been such a domination of New Zealand teams over Australian teams in the last 2-3 decades. That it hasn't really been a rivalry anymore. The last time Australia won a Bledisloe Cup was more than 10 years ago. So, yeah, once that rivalry is dead, fans don't really want to go watch it anymore. I mean, I was speaking to a family member who was here the other day from New Zealand. They stay in New Zealand, and they were saying to me that rugby, people that are around them don't want to go watch rugby anymore in New Zealand. They want to go watch rugby league, because the Warriors, the New Zealand Warriors, their rugby league team, is suddenly a force in rugby league against the Australian teams who have dominated them for so long. So, I mean, that whole rivalry thing's a huge thing. Plus, you got to be, there's big money in Europe, there's big money in Japan, and any player doesn't really want to play his whole career in one place. If he can go overseas, experience a different culture, travel a bit, take his family with, and get paid well for it. I mean, so a lot of those French and Japanese clubs, literally the players get given a house, they get given a car, all they have to do is really turn up at practice. And so from that point of view, you're not going to get an easier way of seeing another country. So a lot of them do it also because it's something different, it's something new, they're getting paid well to do it as well. So you can see a lot of, and plus, once you've played Super Rugby and you're a Crusaders player and you've won the last 7 Super Rugbies, what's there left to win? So, I understand that from players' point of views as well. Players are just as human as us. They want to experience something new. They want a new challenge. And Japan offers that. But I think at the end of the day, it's becoming the big money's in Europe and in Japan. How sustainable Japan is long-term is still a question. But they're certainly trying to make themselves a bigger league. And they're making big name acquisitions, a lot of Springboks, a lot of All Blacks. And I think at the end of the day, those are going to be, it's going to be like football, where no matter where you are as a talented player, you're going to end up playing in one of the big leagues around the world, because that's where the money is. And if you're a talent, they'll come by you. I think just on that, sorry, the one thing that rugby hasn't figured out, and it's still something that boggles my mind why rugby administrators haven't done this, but you sign players on long-term contracts. That's what they do in football. And then if a club wants him, they play a transfer fee. And that transfer fee goes back into the development and back into the schools and the club system, and to pay for other juniors coming through. And rugby just hasn't cottoned onto it. I know the Bulls did it a while back with Trevor Nyakane. They got 5 million from the French club for him. But just generally, rugby's been rather lagging behind. And that's one way of getting money back into the system, especially in South Africa, that could work.
On the subject of Super Rugby, we're now being forced, South Africa, being forced into effectively a 12-month season. And that's becoming a problem, especially with Currie Cup now. Players are complaining about having to play for 20 months in a row. But the solution seems to be either Southern or Northern Hemisphere. We're sort of a hybrid in the middle. We're not going to leave the URC. I think that's probably the best franchise competition in the world now. What's the solution for us to be able to get over this 12-month season? What do you think?
Well, I think World Rugby should do what they've threatened and they've promised and they've told us they're all going to do. I think since 2011 was the first time I heard it. The global season. Bill Beaumont's still in trying to be elected at World Rugby, told us all he's going to get a global season going, that the 2 hemispheres are aligned and we have one rugby season across the world. Unfortunately, that's never happened, and for various reasons. The guys, the Rugby Championship, SANZAR, they don't want to move, especially New Zealand, don't want to move their rugby to a summer time slot in February. The Six Nations absolutely bulk it at moving their Six Nations Championship anywhere else on the calendar. And so there you have it. Then, so between the two, if those are the top 10 nations in World Rugby, and they've refused to move their championships, then we're never going to have a solution. Unfortunately, we sort of stuck in the middle, and I think in the one way, I don't think we'll ever go to Six Nations. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But I think on the other side, we like the fact that we play the All Blacks every year. Australia, not so much. Argentina, there's a bit more of a rivalry, but the All Black games are the big ones for us, and there's already talk of longer tours every 4 years, that we do proper tours with the All Blacks. So I think historically we've got a connection with the All Blacks that we want to keep, and I think most South African rugby fans would want us to keep as well. And it's finding a way of getting that and then fitting it into a 12-month calendar. That's why I laugh when I see things of a World Club Championship and things like that, because it doesn't make sense in the current calendar. And unless you sort the calendar out, you're asking players to these ridiculous physical demands in a extremely physical game. And they just keep on piling on the fixtures and with no rest. And that's why I say, I mean, and where the Currie Cup whole argument comes in is that, the August, September, October frame that they want to put the Currie Cup in sounds great in theory, because then the 4 franchises it's still early enough in their season, they can play in that competition. And there is a Currie Cup still being played. But the problem is, those are almost and you've got to take the month or 2 before that for preparation. But that's almost the time that you have to rest. And we already see that the Springboks have this problem where once July comes and the international season starts, they're basically out of action till October, and they don't get a chance to rest. That's why in February, March, you see the teams like the Sharks having to rest their players for 6 weeks at this stage. That's not ideal. It's not ideal. And if your proper competition is the URC and you want your best teams to play in that, and I think until we get that sorted out, nothing's going to ever change. So I'm not sure where the standoff. There's a standoff between my players at the moment and SA Rugby. We've all read about it. The problem is both sides have got a valid point. SA Rugby loses a lot of money if the Currie Cup doesn't happen. The unions use the lifeblood of their existence if the Currie Cup doesn't happen, and players. I mean, how many players will be out of jobs if there's no Currie Cup? And whereas you take my players who've got to look after player welfare, who are saying, but somewhere we need a break. You can't have guys, playing 12 months a year, 2-3 years in a row. And I don't know what the answer is. The only thing I can say is if World Rugby ever gets its act together and gets a global season off the ground, it'll solve all these problems almost overnight. But until there's a willingness at the top to do this, we're all going to suffer.
Talking about rest, something else Jake mentioned on Tuesday was the fact that the players, non-Springbok players, have to have a rest period of 8 weeks. And what I didn't know is that that has to be 8 consecutive weeks. So the moment he chooses or selects a player within that eight-week period, and then the 8-week rest period has to start again. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, no, that's look. I mean, that's something they've worked out. Sports scientists have worked out around the world, that especially in a physical competition like rugby, is that your body needs that rest from the collisions. And I mean, listen, I mean, anybody who's worked in HR or been in any of those HR presentations, they tell you always, you go on holiday, you need a 2-week proper break. It doesn't help you having 3 weeks leave a year and you take them like 1 day at a time every month. You need a proper 2-week break for your brain to switch off and for you to relax. And it's the same with rugby players. And they have much bigger physical demands than us office workers, so to speak. But it's the same for them, because their bodies need that time, and they need that time also, especially younger players. They're still developing their bodies to, spend time in a gym and not on a field every day where they're crashing into other guys. I accept the word of the sports scientists on that. And unfortunately, we've sort of lurched into this position where we just keep on adding fixtures and adding games. And it also becomes to a point where you ask the average fan who played 2 weeks ago, and would they know? It also takes away the meaning of the competition. So a proper season, like, and I hate to use English football, but football is probably the most successful sporting professional league in the world. And they sit there and they have a thing where their players have to have 8 weeks off, and then they start with a preseason. We used to have that. We used to have Currie Cup last week in October, and then November the Springboks would tour, and in that time the provincial players would be off, and then they'd start in December somewhere with a bit of fitness training and not contact stuff in January, and end of January you'd start preseason games, and end of February start Super Rugby. Now we don't have any of that. We literally go from URC into test season, into Currie Cup, into URC, and then the cycle just continues.
One last thing about Jake. He made a lot of noise about the flight arrangements that are being left to the last moment, and they have to, fly on 8 different flights and fly via Zurich and via Dubai and Doha and whatever. And then SA Rugby seemed to have taken the bait a bit, and they responded, and they managed to get everybody there by Wednesday morning, 8 o'clock. But what do you think? Why did this happen? Was SA Rugby fast asleep, or they just not bothered about making plans in advance, or was it maybe something to do with the Bulls?
I think there's probably one of those cases where everything can be true, all sides of the argument can be true. It's not often it happens. I think Jake is probably right in raising it. He's got to look after the welfare of his players. And I saw that initial flight list, and it was ridiculous. You had 3 players here, 4 players there, 6 players there. And it's all because, being professional athletes, and I know people always laugh when you say this, but a business class flight for a professional athlete is better because they've got to perform. And yes, scrum halves maybe don't need a business class, but when you're 2 meters tall and you're sitting cramped for 13 hours in a plane, and we've all done that, we all know how horrible it is, and you've got to get off the plane and perform. It's not great. And while people might say, they should be able to do it and they're just spoiled, etc., no professional league in the world does it. And Jake's right there. Football doesn't do it. They make sure that their players are looked after. Of course, there's a lot more money there, and it's a totally different argument. But by raising it, Jake put the issue front and center, and everybody said it was ridiculous. And good on SA Rugby. They came back, and they came back with better flights. How they did it, I don't know. If it was always the case, or if the Bulls had it wrong, or the bottom line is everybody won at the end of the day. SA Rugby did their job. The Bulls got better flights. But, I mean, this is nothing new. John Dobson complained about this last year with the Stormers when they went to Exeter. It becomes ridiculous. And what people don't realize as well, it's as Jake said the other day to us, is it's a cumulative effect. They were in Pretoria, then in Wales, then in Dublin to play Leinster, then back home to play Lyon. Now you're back on a flight, then you're back home again. And while anybody who's traveled a lot will know that it's not a bad thing to travel, but you do get that sort of fatigue and everything that sort of catches up with you after crossing time zones and carrying on and being on flights all the time. It does have effect on you. And we're talking about a sport where inches are the difference, where 1% can make a huge difference. You want your team to get there and be as focused as possible, not be in 8 different flights or 6 different flights in the end, where it was 6 different flights, maybe 5 if you take away Jake and Edgar's flight. You'd want them to be focused totally on the job at hand. It makes it difficult, and then you have to add to the fact that, especially in this Champions Cup, in the last couple of years, the only team that's won away from home in a knockout game has been La Rochelle, and they're the team with a £200 million or 10 million euro, 200 million rand budget. So they've got a deep squad, and they've got a squad of a huge pack, and they're a great team. That's why they're defending champions. But they won against Leinster in Dublin last year, and they won against Stormers on the weekend. But there aren't teams in this competition that win away from home. Because normally, anyway, in this competition, you have home crowds, you have referees that give hometown decisions based on the pressure the crowds put on them. That's normal in any sport. It happens. But then you add the travel factor into it, and it becomes so much more difficult to win. So I think on the one hand, I can understand SA Rugby. People say, why don't they pre-book, or why don't they take a charter? They can't book their own flights. SA Rugby books the flights for them at the moment. The Bulls have asked to book their own flights, I've heard, but that can only happen when we're a full member of the EPCR, which is only, I think, in a year and a half's time. Then we can start booking our own flights. But also, if you're a travel agent and you're talking about 4.5 million rand for flights, some of the airlines aren't going to be as accommodating if you want to cancel 4.5 million rands worth of flights at the last minute. And unfortunately, Northampton Munster's game ended only at 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. So if you're going to go 4:30 to go find 40 business class flights on a Sunday afternoon for Tuesday night, I think anybody's going to struggle. So I understand that part of it as well, logistically. at the end of there's going to be a way. There's going to be. I think the scheduling has to be better. The hopefully a sponsor with a direct flight would make it a lot easier. But these are all things that sort of come with the development of a competition, and they're not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, I would be the one, want to be the one that has to book, like you said, 40 business class seats on 24 hours notice. I mean, it's just basically impossible. But anyway, like you said, maybe the bit of the buying power that SA Rugby has played a bit of a role there. I mean, they must be spending hundreds of millions of rands a year on travel alone. I mean, that's probably one of the reasons they were able to pull this rabbit out of the hat.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people also don't realize is that I know some people say 4.5 million for these flights is ridiculous, but had the result gone the other way and Munster had to come to South Africa, then SA Rugby would be footing that 4.5 million bill for their flights as well. So that's just part of the competition. And unfortunately, we're not shareholders in the EPCR yet. We have to, like if you want to buy shares, you've got to buy your way into the company. And we're busy doing that now. We're in year 2 of 3. So it will change. And the long term, the monetary effects of it are a lot better. Just a perfect example of that would also, just to counter the argument, is that this weekend, the Bulls play Northampton in, I think it's a 27,000-seater stadium, and they get 50% of the gate. And the ticket prices, I think, range from £10 to £70 a ticket. So when all that's said and done, they're probably going to make about 4.5 million rand out of this game in Northampton, win or lose. That's why, put in perspective from an administrator's point of view, Manie the book missing that kick against La Rochelle. If they'd won that, they would have gone to Leinster, who would have played them in a 50,000-seater Aviva Stadium this weekend, and they probably would have made about 10 million out of that kick. And I'm actually quite surprised none of my Cape colleagues have picked up on that. It could have cost the Storm is 10 million, which I mean, it's not the way to look at it, because it's very unfair on a guy like Manie, who's had those clutch kicks and made them in the past. But yeah, it has got a financial implication.
Thanks, Brenden. Illuminating as always. I'm not sure what the solution is for South African rugby. I can't see it changing in the near future anyway. I don't think there's an easy solution at all.
No, there isn't, and that's the thing. I mean, yeah, since I put also Jake's quotes on Twitter, I probably had about 100 replies from people saying, "But try this," or "Why don't you do this?" or "Why?" And while all those answers are genuine from rugby fans, there's bigger implications, and longer term implications, and these things will work themselves out eventually. But these are the teething problems of being in a new league and a new, between two continents that are far away. And yeah, we're not in a great position being halfway across the world from the rest of Europe. So it's a tough one, but our players will get better, and they'll find ways of mitigating the travel as well. That happened in Super Rugby. It took a while, but yeah, and we need stronger squads. And I think for me, the best case scenario is smarter squads, players that maybe aren't in the international frame but do have a lot of experience, and a bigger squad that you have almost 2 match day 23s that are almost of equal strength, that you can pick and choose which you play. I mean, I'm talking about an ideal world. I don't know if that's you'd be able to do that on current budgets, etc. But that's where you need to be if you're going to be competitive in Europe.
Okay, we're out of time now. I think we've got to spend another half an hour talking about this. But thanks, Brenden. I appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll do this again soon.
Sure, anytime.
Okay, guys, thanks for that. Keep an eye out for some of the other videos. Yeah. We had a nice video about the best fly-offs in South Africa since 1992. Make sure you don't miss it. I'll put the link in the description below. Until next time, bye.